This is a poster that was used as part of an anti-smoking campaign back in the 1970s. Today I ask the same question but differently. What if the enemies in a video game spread the same deadly side effects that drugs do? Trip is a 2D survival horror game. Everything in Trip revolves around an underlying theme of substance abuse, mixing the game's sinister aesthetic with the real-life trauma that drugs can cause. The player's main goal is to repair their car when it breaks down in a shady location. They must achieve this by exploring the surrounding area and finding the multiple pieces to get their car running again. The player must also avoid being killed by monsters. As an optional goal, the player can find stranded NPCs and save them. NPCs will follow behind the player as they are searching for the parts. Trip's monsters are few but unkillable. The player can use a melee attack to briefly stun the monster, or a gun to cause a longer stun from long range. Ammo is rare, so this is a riskier option since the player may miss or run out of ammo. The player can also interact with and pick up the objective items, but at the cost of either moving slower or being unable to move for a certain amount of time. For example, if the player finds a wrench, they are going to have to yank it out of a wall, which will force them to stay on the wrench for several seconds. Due to this, when and how you use your stuns is crucial to your survival. NPCs that you rescue can also help you speed up these tasks. There are 3 ways that the player can lose the game. The first way is if the player runs out of hit points, which can be refilled by using health kits that can be found around the level. The second way is if the player overdoses. An overdose occurs if the player takes too much damage from the same type of drug. Overdose damage cannot be reduced and is a way of preventing reckless gameplay and excessive damage boosting. The final way the game can end is with a car crash. If a player takes damage from any drug that would degrade their ability to drive, they have a chance of getting into a car crash when they attempt to leave the location. This can be prevented by rescuing at least one NPC and keeping them sober. They will become the designated driver when the location is left. Along with taking damage, the player can also gain side effects when hit by a monster. Players will always gain one positive and one negative side effect. These side effects create moments in gameplay where the player may want to take damage on purpose to gain a positive effect with the consequence of a negative effect plus the loss of sobriety. Part of what makes drugs so compelling is when the positive trade-off seems worth it compared to the consequences. Let's demonstrate a gameplay example. The player runs into this building to grab the wrench that they need to fix their car. The player goes to the first monster and stuns it to get past. The player then dashes past the second monster and spends a few seconds yanking the wrench out of the wall. By the time they finish, both monsters have moved and cornered the player. The player decides to take a risk and let meth hit them. The player luckily gains the trip side effect and quickly teleports outside of the room. The player has acquired what they need to repair the car, but now faces the risk of getting in a car crash unless they take the time to rescue an NPC. The game has the same 2D perspective as Death Road to Canada, but rather than having multiple procedurally generated stops, my game will have the player stopping at one handcrafted location per playthrough. Also, instead of being chased by a horde of zombies, the drugs are more like Left 4 Dead 2 special units, where they are few and far between but very powerful. The drugs cannot be defeated, similar to the Xenomorph in Alien Isolation, and must be avoided. We have more ideas that risk being out of scope without proper mitigation, such as adding more drug types ranging from more common and weak to very rare and life-threatening. The mitigation is to have our few standard enemies and make sure these core effects are in the game first. Another idea is a difficulty called Existing User, where the player starts the game with a permanent positive or negative effect. The risk here comes from balance required for this game mode. Mitigation would be preventing certain effects from being chosen for this game mode. My name is Daniel Williams and this has been Trip. Thank you for your time.